Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. Well, it's time once again for another one of our Gospel at Work segments, and I'm delighted to have as a guest today Mr. Mark Lamprecht. Mark, welcome. How are you?
I'm great, RC. Glad to be here. Hope you're doing well.
I'm doing just fine. Now, Mark's field is financial investment advising kind of field. He's been involved in the broad field there for a couple of decades, and it may surprise someone to, or stretch someone to think, well, what in the world does the gospel have to do with investments? How? And that's precisely why I asked you to be here, to help people understand that. It might be a good idea to maybe start with how your understanding of the gospel impacts your understanding of wealth itself, since we have in the church a kind of a mixed emotions about wealth, where some people are in favor and some people think it's kind of scary.
Yeah, that's a good question. And it may be even more specifically under our mostly capitalist system here in the United States. I think the Bible itself speaks of not naming capitalism, for example, but we have individual ownership rights and responsibilities. And so, the gospel, I think about that in light of how it shapes my worldview. And I think about Jesus' two greatest commandments: love the Lord your God with all of your being, and then love your neighbor as yourself. And Christians are called to be good stewards of everything that we have, and that includes money and wealth. And you can do a lot of good things with wealth. You can do a lot of bad things with wealth. And it's not the wealth itself, it's the person, as Jesus told us, right? It's
right.
What comes out of us is what, what's the word?
Defiles us.
Defiles us.
Yes.
Defiles us. And so it's not that. The externalities and what we have responsibility for is what we do with it. And so, again, people misquote the root of all evil is the love of money. Right?
Absolutely. In fact, I remember correcting my pastor as a 14-year-old when he did that. I was probably not as respectful as I should have been, but I was shocked that my pastor, who believes the Bible, would be so free and loose and leave out that it's not money the root of all evil. It's the love of money that's the root of all kinds of evil.
Right. All kinds of evil, and even clearer. Right. Exactly. So I think that's how the gospel informs it. It grounds me as a Christian, hopefully every Christian, in the values that we put on everything that we're responsible for in our lives, from the penny to the $100,000 account we might have, or whatever in between and beyond.
Right. Well, isn't it something that Jesus saw fit to teach through one of his parables, in the parable of the talents, when we think about, okay, who is the one who gave us our talents? That would be God himself. And so if you look at it, in that parable, the one who hands out this money to his servants before he leaves, in a sense, represents God the Father. And God the Father, without any embarrassment or sense of shame, agrees with the fearful one that, yes, he is used to, gaining from the wealth that he has, and that's what his expectation is, and he rebukes this fellow. And so it's I think a pretty strong rebuke for those who think there's, something wrong with prospering.
Yeah, certainly, and that's always a fantastic parable to think about in terms of wealth investing as an add-on to that. what's fascinating about that is the person that had the least protected it the most, or so he thought,
right?
And was chastised the most, was punished.
Yeah, and part of stewardship means risking, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
In fact, I'm just going to say, earlier today, I did a segment on business ethics with my ethics students at Ivy Tech, and I asked them, I said, why do you think it is that we all think that the business owner is greedy because he doesn't pay more, but we don't think the employee is greedy, though he wants to be paid more? And I said, I think it comes, at the end of the day, I think it comes down to the fact that we think, well, the owner has more, and the employee has less. But what I pointed out is, hey, it's the owner who's risking everything. And risk is something which is, again, what that parable deals with. You do have to risk in order to get that reward of interest. You have to take a chance, and I'm sure that may be even hard for your clients to understand that there is risk. I mean, maybe you've not been the bearer of bad news and had to say to somebody, well, your net worth in 2008, your net worth plummeted this much, but
right.
Is there in those moments, those bad news kind of moments, how do you manage that to be gracious to folks in that kind of loss?
So, I have a sheet that I use, and you can just think historically about this. For reasons, I'm going to put it in this perspective, for reasons not to invest, which goes along with reasons to stop investing. You're too fearful of what's going to happen.
Uh-huh.
So you go back, and there are 100 things that have happened over the history of this economic world, or the world in general, from attacks on our soil, Pearl Harbor, the crash, the 2008 you just mentioned,
COVID,
dealings with COVID. COVID is a great first immediate example, which we recovered swiftly from that. And I always tell people, look, the American people are resilient, and we're going to adjust, and we're going to keep going, because we all need to keep going. We need to keep living. I live in Atlanta, and so every day I get behind the wheel of my car, there's a good chance that I might not come home.
Right.
Either that day or permanently. So everything we do has risk to it. And so when I look at that perspective of all these reasons to not risk investing, I flip it over, and you go back to 1929 to today, and you see this huge market upswing of, here's one big reason to invest. I don't know what the market's going to do in next year, in a year, but I feel confident in the next 5 to 10 years it's going to be up.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
There's a myopia that we have, I think, both spiritually and in terms of our investments, where we can only look at short term, and we miss out. And one of the, again, things that I love to ask people this question when they're feeling discouraged about the state of the church, I'll say to them, how many actual Christians who went to heaven when they died, who trusted in Jesus, how many of them existed inside the boundaries of what is now the United States 450 years ago? And usually they're like, I don't know. I say, I know. And they said, how many? I said, 0.
Right.
What do you mean 0? I said, the gospel hadn't been brought to the whole of the New World. It's not just these United States. It's what's now Canada and Mexico and all of South America and Central America. There was no gospel here, but there were people here. Mm-hmm. And so you can cry and complain and whine about the nature and state of the church in the Western Hemisphere, but it's a heck of a lot better than it was 450 years ago.
Oh, my goodness. I can't believe what people before us accomplished without the technology and resources that we have today.
Well, and people don't get that. They don't get the power of the tools. That's another thing that I try to teach people, basic principles, and say, look, take the guy who, if you've ever been to Africa, I've been to Africa, and in multiple nations that I was in, when you would drive along the roads, and when you're in a car and the roads in Africa, they call it a missionary massage, because the car's bouncing around so much that your whole body's getting jostled, and there's just ruts in and it's just really difficult. But while you're in that car, you can watch and see there are these guys with these wagons. And on the wagons are hundreds of 2-liter bottles of soda. But there's no horse. It's the guy pushing the wagon. And when it starts to go downhill, he's got to move to the front of the wagon to keep it from running away from him. And that's how the Coke gets from wherever it gets bottled in the big city out to all these villages along the road. This guy pushing this. And then I said, now think about how that works here in America. You've got a guy who gets in his truck in the morning, and he fills up with with thousands of 2-liter bottles, and he drives to this store and he drives to that store. So now, the reason the guy in America is making enough money to provide for his family comfortably with air conditioning and hot water and a car and a television, and the guy in Africa isn't because the guy in America is smarter. It's not because he's stronger. It's not because he's more hardworking and more diligent. It's because he has access to the tool that increases his productivity. If you were to take the same guy in Africa and take away his wagon so that he had to carry 4 at a time, he'd make even less.
Well, you said a key word there, and what I try to explain to people is that money is a tool.
Yes.
And so as I walk through the values with them to try to understand what's important to them about money, it's a tool. So when people come to me and just basically, I want to make as much money as I can, and my returns basically for the sake of making money, that's not a thing. That's an open equation. There's nothing there. And so I have to bring them back to the tool aspect. What's the purpose of this money? What's the purpose of your investing? And what's interesting talking about risk in that realm of thought is, I often ask the question, will you outlive your money, or will your money outlive you? If people are afraid to take risk, your money is probably going to outlive you, because regardless of what's going on in the world, in our economy, inflation is not going to stop for you to take a pause. People are going to keep going around you. And I also try to explain when people get worried about risk, something you said earlier made me think of this. The people who are retiring today, if they're really scared about taking on risk and they want to pull almost everything back, number one, they're not going to keep up with inflation, and depending on what they have saved, there's a lot of other variables, but for the sake of this discussion, just say, they may not keep up with inflation. They may not keep up with their spending. But that same market they're afraid to invest in is paying and paving the way for the 30-year-old. They're 65 or 66 now or whatever. But so if you're worried the market's going away, what chance do these 30-year-olds have for the future?
Yeah.
It hasn't gone away yet. If we ever go to a place where we live in like a Mad Max world, nothing matters anymore.
Well, you'd want a different set of tools in that situation, probably.
Right.
If I remember my Mad Max movies correctly, there's a sense. Something you said brought something to my mind about this idea of risk. I've spent quite a bit of time and energy myself in front of abortion mills, calling people to repent and embrace the work of Christ. One of my dearest friends is John Barros, who is the best at this in the world. He is the rock star of ministering outside abortion mills, and he was the best man in my wedding. Very dear, dear friend. And I've tried to persuade others, do the same thing, do the same thing, do the same thing. And I've gotten this question more than once. Hey, I'm really excited about what you're saying. I really want to do this. I've talked to my pastor, but they just have one question. They want to know if it's safe. And I tell them, okay, well, here's what I want you to go tell them. Tell them, no, absolutely not. It's not in the least bit safe. If you're
Right.
looking for something safe to do, then stay inside your church. This is dangerous. People will hate you. People will curse you. People will come after you. I've seen people have guns drawn on them. But here's the thing. If you don't go, those souls will end up in hell. Those babies will end up murdered. So the question is, are you willing to risk those risks in order to reap the blessing of seeing God at work? In fact, if you want, I tell people, if you want to see the Holy Spirit work, then go where it's dangerous, because that's where he lives. So I think, in a very similar way, it's true with respect to all of our lives. And I think what I want people to see is the unity between our spiritual lives and our financial lives, in the sense that those principles of risk and reward are always there. You've got to get outside yourself. If you want to evangelize, you need to be willing to talk. I know you probably, Mark, you have to do some sales, as it were. I mean, even just listening to you talking about trying to deal with people's fear of the risk, you've got to persuade people, hey, you need to do this. You want to do this. And that's scary.
Yeah, certainly. And I do have to, whether we admit it or not, I think every job involves some level of sales, but definitely with what I do. And what's interesting, so what you just mentioned about people are people. They
Yes.
really are. As we know, not only is there nothing new under the sun, there's no new attitudes, emotions from people under the
Right.
sun. That's all encompassing there. And so, I have an MDiv. I don't know if you knew that or not.
I did not know that.
So I've got an MDiv in apologetics from New Orleans Baptist Seminary.
Okay.
And, I decided to stay in my profession, but I earned that degree, and I thought, well, compliance let me use that. So it's on my business card. It's in my email.
Okay.
So in a sense, there's some passive way of being a witness there,
Right.
not just how I treat people and the way I talk, and
Right.
and I do bring up, when it's appropriate, the Lord, the gospel,
You're going to die.
church life. Yeah. So, my business is not evangelism, but along with that can come evangelism. I have clients who are Christian. I have clients who are not Christian.
Uh-huh.
But I'm never ashamed of who I am and where I am. Again, it's printed out there in my material.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, there's some selling, and a lot of that's just helping people alleviate their fear. Mm-hmm. That's what the parable of the talent. He was fearful.
Right.
It was the risk, but it was what's going to happen, if I take this risk, and everything was fear motivated.
Right.
But there's no guarantee we're all going to have a job tomorrow. So
Right.
But people don't see that.
Well, and that's where I think the gospel can really shape more than we know, in the sense that because of the gospel, because of the glorious truth that our spirits will live forever, because of the surety that we have that our treasure is secure in Christ, because we would give up everything we have in order to have the pearl of great price, all of a sudden, risk for us is nothing. This is why we can be fearless, right? When we go and press the crown rights of King Jesus, what are they going to do to us? Kill us? I mean, that would be awful, wouldn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
When we go into the marketplace of ideas and we proclaim his lordship, and they, mock us and shame us. Oh, how terrible that is. We got nothing to lose because we already have everything.
Right, exactly. And if God blesses you with more,
yes,
through your managing your finances and investing and et cetera, you have that much more responsibility. And
yes.
if he has blessed you with more, it's probably because you have been responsible.
Right, which is part of that parable too.
Exactly right. And so I often say, I just don't think about it, but I say, Lord willing, this will happen, or
right,
whatever, in conversations with clients. And occasionally that opens up the door to further dialogue.
Uh-huh.
Again, I'm not an evangelist.
Right.
in profession, in
Right.
vocation. But if those doors open and I see a chance to talk with somebody about higher purpose, God's higher purpose, the
Right.
gospel,
Mm-hmm.
then I'll do that.
Well, and I can hear it in your voice that it's there all the time with you, and I appreciate that about you.
Well, what's interesting is my MDiv and my especially my email tagline. I don't know if anybody even keeps business cards anymore. So, even if I hand them out occasionally, but that comes back and they say, I've gotten a few clients that want to work with me because of that. And I just say, well, I hope that speaks something of my character.
Uh-huh.
They're bad actors in everything, everywhere.
Absolutely.
I know that.
Yep.
And I don't shy away from that. I don't try to make excuses, but it's there and people ask about it. And so that again, often opens dialogue, and it's just kind of a passive witness. And I explain where my values lie.
That's terrific. Well, Mark, we're out of time, but let me give you an opportunity. I know you've got different social media places where people can maybe follow you. Can you give those out real quickly?
Yeah, basically now I'm just on Twitter and LinkedIn.
Okay.
Twitter is at Mark A. Lamprecht, MarkALamprecht. Also a very good spelling bee word. And then same thing on LinkedIn. I think it's the same URL, but I'm pretty easy to find there.
Okay.
And then meetmarknow.com is if you just want to go straight to somewhere to find me, you can find me there, meetmarknow.com.
Okay, terrific. Thank you so much, Mark, for being with us. Thank you for the work that you're doing. I pray for God's prosperity on your family and on your clients' families, and appreciate your patience and investing time on this program.
Yeah. Thank you so much, RC. I really appreciate being here, and God bless you, and we'll talk soon.
You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com. And join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.